We're back and we're going to dive right in. And our topics for today include the question of values as well as a global culture. Evangelical Protestants became a powerful conservative political force in the U.S., particularly during the presidency of George W. Bush. Catholic conservatives led opposition to abortion, homosexuality, marriage of priests, and admission of women to the priesthood. Israel's hyper-Orthodox Jews, known as Haredim, vehemently resisted both Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in 2005 and plans for withdrawal from parts of the West Bank. In India, Hindu zealots made the BJP party a powerful political force. The birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979 made the current Muslim political assertiveness visible to all. But by the year 2000, acts of terrorism by non-Iranian Muslim groups claiming to be acting for religious reasons were capturing the headlines. Media technology increased terrorism's effectiveness as a political tactic from the 1980s onward, especially with spectacular attacks against the US and Europe. Most notorious of the terrorists was the Saudi-born charismatic leader Osama bin Laden. Through his group of fighters called Al-Qaeda, he attacked American embassies, the U.S. Navy destroyer Cole, and the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. Further terrorist attacks by Indonesians in 2002, North Africans in 2004, English-born Muslims in 2005, and Pakistanis in Mumbai in 2008 suggested that the violence begun by Al-Qaeda had become decentralized and that recruits might no longer be taking orders from bin Laden. Debate has not settled on the reasons for the increasing violence, but fear of terrorism became pervasive throughout the world, and many peaceful Muslims found themselves suspect because of their beliefs. All right, so here we have a number of followers for certain religions. So we've got Christians, Muslims, unaffiliated, Hindus, Buddhists, and folk religions, and then others. As well as you can see here, the number of Jewish people in the world. And as I'm sure you can imagine, that number has dropped dramatically after the Holocaust. And if you remember from the World War II series, we talked that many historians believe that number is up from 6 million Jews to 11 million, based on the number of concentration camps, thanks to new evidence. Universal rights. The UN, or United Nations, sought to protect the rights of individuals through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, passed by the General Assembly in December of 1948. The Declaration's emphasis on individual rights was derived mostly from European and American history. Many of the countries that later signed this declaration did so because it implicitly condemned European colonial regimes. Rather than addressing fundamental philosophical issues regarding the concept of human rights activists work through non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and focus their efforts on agreed-upon violations of human rights, torture, imprisonment without trial, and summary execution by death squads, and on famine relief and refugee assistance. The U.S. demands that its citizens be exempted from the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, and that enemy combatants taken prisoner during the war on terrorism did not have to be treated in accordance with the Third Geneva Convention. This, as well as its withdrawal from the Kyoto Agreement, has prompted significant reaction from critics of the U.S. government. Positions on the question of women's rights clearly demonstrate the dichotomy of views between the westernized, industrialized nations and the nations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The feminist movement in the West was concerned with voting rights, equal access to education and jobs, and to end gender discrimination and sexual exploitation. Feminists in the West also decried the oppression of women in other parts of the world. But some non-Western women complained about the deterioration of morality and family life in the West, and question the priorities of the Western feminist movement. International conferences have focused attention on women's issues more than they have generated actual solutions. Increasing women's education and ensuring better employment opportunities are seen as fundamental, but at times, Western human rights workers have come under criticism as trying to carry out a sort of cultural imperialism. Economic globalization has brought many women in India more opportunities. Opportunities are at least available to those women who can afford education. Prosperity and technology have also created new problems for women in India. The dowry system has been altered in the consumer economy. Young brides are murdered when families cannot meet in law's escalating dowry demands. Because dowries are expensive, many families believe that the birth of daughters means financial ruin. Traditionally, the number of daughters was limited by female infanticide. Modern technology has meant that many parents use sonograms to determine the gender of a fetus and whether or not to abort a pregnancy. And this has led to a mass gender disparity in which boys now outnumber girls. A similar gender imbalance is being created in China, which also favors male children traditionally. So, just a couple of famous women to discuss. So, first is Wangari Maathai. She's a Kenyan biologist and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. She founded the Green Belt movement in central Kenya. And of course, Malala of Pakistan became the youngest ever winner of the Nobel in 2014. For blogging about her life under the Islamist Taliban in Pakistan, she was beaten. This began when she was 11 years old. However, she continued to blog about her right for an education. She was shot in the head for continuing to do this and treated in Britain, where she is currently finishing her schooling. She has since become a vocal international advocate for girls' education. In 2012, Aung San Suu Kyi was released from a Burmese prison where she was a political prisoner since 1990. She was elected to parliament in 2012. All right, so now we're going to move on to talk about global culture, starting with the media and the message, and also pop culture. In the 1960s, television began to spread to most of the non-Western world, where government monopolies ensured that the new medium would be used to disseminate a unified national viewpoint rather than function as a medium for the transmission of Western culture and opinions. By the 1980s, satellites had brought a much wider array of programming and information, even to the most remote parts of the world. American organizations like CNN, the cable news network, used satellite transmission technology to enter the international market, proffering a fundamentally American view of the news. In response to CNN, other countries have developed their own 24-hour news coverage, such as Al Jazeera in the Persian Gulf Emirate of Qatar, which interprets the news of the Iraq War, for instance, from a different perspective than the US news media. On a personal note, my favorite is the BBC. The development of digital technology offered the possibility of combining the separate technologies of movies, television, and computers, while the development of the internet transformed business and education. By 2011, it was apparent that social media had become a very powerful tool in organizing political movements, again, as seen in the Arab Spring in particular, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement and the women's movements. The global film industry is diverse, but dominated by Hollywood and Bollywood. Music and sports reveal that global culture comes from many sources and influences. Global interaction in sports also reveals the diversity of global culture, as well as how people of different backgrounds can be united when their favorite team wins or loses. Or wins sometimes. Haha. Sorry, guys. Giants 2008 Super Bowl. It was amazing. Initially, the content was heavily American, but consumer products of American, European, and Japanese transnational companies have found their way to international markets, and filmmakers around the world began to be inspired to produce films on global themes for international audiences. So, a couple of things. The first picture you can see is the CNN, but then the middle picture is the state-sponsored news in I believe that was North Korea. And the picture at the bottom, let's talk about that for a second. So, if you're a fan of the Hunger Games, you should check out Battle Royale. It's a Japanese film, but it basically it's the same basic concept. You have a group of students who are taken out of the classroom, dropped off, and are then informed that the only way to survive is to kill each other. So, yeah, kind of sounds similar to the Hunger Games, and a lot of people argue that that's where the idea came from. If you're a fan of the movie, like not the first two, actually the first one, because now there's 3 of them out. Just watch the first one. The movie The Ring. Well, that is actually the American version of the Japanese film. And they are both completely scary and freaky. So watch them with the lights on. But Battle Royale is really good. It's really twisted though, but it's really good. A big part of that is they got actual teenagers to play the parts of the teenagers in Battle Royale, which makes it that much creepier, as opposed to the Hunger Games, where everybody, all the teens who are there in their 20s. Just saying. In 2015, the total world population was 7 billion. 2008 was the first year that the majority of the world's population lived in cities. Increased urbanization has put stress on city infrastructure, such as water supplies, transportation, education, and sanitation. Population concentrations are shifting globally. Immigration has a big part in that. Immigration policies are often controversial. Population movements today differ from those in the past. Multiple diseases are of concern in the age of globalization. Ebola virus spread and first cases outside of West Africa emerged and were contained. H1N1, or swine flu, became a concern, as were new strains of older diseases such as malaria, which were now spreading globally via jet airplanes. HIV/AIDS is one of several diseases that spread quickly thanks to increased globalization. Global climate change is also affecting worldwide health via natural disasters. Some diseases are spread more easily thanks to increases in temperature and rising sea levels. Climate change. Oh, sorry. Flooding and monsoons, which are becoming more violent, provide breeding grounds for waterborne diseases. The Kyoto Protocol of 1997 was designed to address global warming. Unfortunately, the US did not sign the Kyoto Protocol, and it collapsed in 2012. We have a trend of doing that. League of Nations, Kyoto Protocol, it's fine. Countries are now debating how the global burden of climate change and exploring the goal of sustainable development. Another global climate problem is deforestation, which escalates greenhouse gas emissions. The Paris Agreement is an agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. And the Paris Agreement is dealing with greenhouse gases emissions mitigation and adaptation and finance starting in the year 2020. The language of the agreement was negotiated by representatives of 195 countries at the 21st Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC in Paris and was adopted by consensus on December 12th, 2015. It was open for signatures on April 22nd, 2016, which is Earth Day, at a ceremony in New York. As of December 2016, 194 UNFCCC members have signed the treaty, 133 of which have ratified it. After several European states ratified the agreement in October 2016, there were enough countries that had ratified the agreement that produced enough of the world's greenhouse gases for the agreement to enter into force. The agreement finally went into effect on November 4th, 2016. Cultural links across national and ethnic boundaries at the elite level generated much less controversy than did the globalization of popular culture. Russian-American collaboration on space missions, and in the business world, the flow of graduate students and researchers from all around the world to different laboratories, and the use of English as a global language were all aspects of globalization at an elite level. Although world literature remained highly diverse, English emerged as the first global language, a development with roots in both the spread of the British Empire in the 19th century, that would be imperialism, folks, and the post-1945 rise of the US to global political and economic predominance. Western universities have also become the model for higher education around the world. Diverse cultural traditions have persisted at the end of the 20th century, despite the globalization of industrial society and the integration of economic markets. Japan, for example, was for a long time a success in the modern industrial world in spite of, or perhaps because of, its group-oriented, hierarchical approach to social relations. The existence of cultural diversity in the future is not secure, though. In the face of these globalizing trends and influences, anthropologists would remind us that cultures do not adapt and change do not survive. And congratulations, everyone. That is the end. We did it. All right. That being said, folks, we're done with the podcast. So here's the deal. The AP exam is in less than a month. This is both a marathon and a sprint. Eat well, sleep well, study well. Good night and good luck. And cheers. Thought I wouldn't say it, did ya?